The fluorescent light above Daniel's cubicle had been flickering for 6 weeks. He'd submitted the maintenance request 3 times. Nobody came. He'd stopped looking up at it, learned to live inside the strobe the way you learn to sleep through a neighbor's dog or a marriage falling apart. You just adapt. You fold yourself smaller until the irritation stops registering as pain and starts registering as normal. That was the thing about Hargrove and Associates that Daniel Chen had never been able to fully articulate to his wife, to his father, to anyone who asked how's work over a holiday dinner. It wasn't that anything dramatic happened there. It was that everything small happened there, endlessly accumulating like sediment, until one day you looked in the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the man looking back, the one with the slightly hunched shoulders and the eyes that had learned not to want things too badly. He was 34 years old. He had worked at Hargrove and Associates for 9 years. He had been passed over for promotion twice, received 4 exceeds expectations performance reviews, and eaten lunch at his desk approximately 1,800 times. He had a wife named Priya who still laughed at his jokes, a 7-year-old daughter named Maya who thought he could fix anything, and a father named Henry who had called him every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. for as long as Daniel could remember. His father had called every Sunday until he couldn't. The call came on a Tuesday. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket during a budget reconciliation meeting, a meeting that had been running for 2 hours and had, by anyone's honest assessment, accomplished nothing. He felt the vibration and ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Then a 3rd time, and something in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the spreadsheet on the projector screen. He stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, and his Aunt Lily's voice came through in pieces. Hospital last night, they tried, Daniel, I'm so sorry, and the hallway around him kept existing, indifferently, fluorescent and beige, while the world restructured itself entirely around a new and permanent absence. His father was gone. Henry Chen, 71 years old. A retired high school history teacher who made his own dumplings from scratch, who drove 4 hours every Thanksgiving without complaint, who had attended every one of Maya's dance recitals, including the disastrous one where half the girls forgot the choreography and the other half did it wrong, and had leaned over to Daniel afterward and whispered, she was the best one up there. Who had called every Sunday at 9 a.m. not because they always had things to say, but because the call itself was the thing. The call was him saying, I'm still here, you're still mine. Daniel stood in the beige hallway for a long time. Then he went back into the meeting, gathered his notebook, and told them he had a family emergency. He drove home with both hands on the wheel, very carefully, the way you do when you're afraid of what might happen if you stop concentrating. The funeral arrangements took shape over the next 24 hours in the way these things do, through a fog of phone calls and relatives and decisions that feel obscene to be making, choosing casket linings and flower arrangements, and whether the reception should have a vegetarian option. Priya handled most of it while Daniel sat at the kitchen table and answered questions when asked. The service was set for Saturday. There were things to coordinate before then, his aunt flying in from Vancouver, his cousin driving from Phoenix, his father's affairs, the apartment, the boxes of a life that would need to eventually be sorted through. Daniel would need Thursday and Friday as well, 4 days total. 4 days? He had 19 days of paid time off sitting in his employee portal untouched, because Hargrove and Associates had a culture not written anywhere, not in any handbook, but understood by everyone who wanted to survive there, of treating PTO as a resource to be approved, not a benefit to be used. Daniel had learned over 9 years to ask permission before he breathed. He composed the email to his manager, Richard Calloway, at 11 p.m. on Tuesday night. He read it 4 times. He apologized twice, once in the opening sentence, once in the closing, which, in the numb grief of that night, did not strike him as strange. It was just how you talked to Richard. You apologized for existing in a way that required something from him. He explained about his father. He listed the dates. He mentioned carefully that he had 19 days of accrued PTO. He said he hoped it wasn't too much trouble. He hit send and went to lie next to Priya in the dark. Richard Calloway called him the next morning at 8:47 a.m. Richard was 52 years old, had been with Hargrove and Associates for 23 years, and operated with the specific confidence of a man who had never once been told that his way of doing things was wrong. He was not a cruel person exactly. He was something more mundane and more damaging. He was a man who had confused process with power for so long that he could no longer tell them apart. Daniel, he said, I got your email. Thanks for calling, Richard. I want to start by saying I'm sorry for your loss. He said it the way people say have a great weekend, the words in the right order, the meaning evacuated entirely. Your father, you said? Yes, he passed yesterday morning. Right. A pause. Daniel heard papers shuffling, or what he imagined were papers shuffling. Richard was the kind of man who made sounds that suggested busyness regardless of whether busyness was occurring. Here's the thing, Daniel. I've been looking at the calendar and we've got the Meredith account presentation on Friday. You're the lead on that. Daniel closed his eyes. I'm aware of the presentation. It's a significant account, probably our biggest pitch in Q2. I understand that, Richard. Now, I spoke with HR. This was never a good sign, the preemptive HR consultation, the procedural armor being strapped on before the ambush, and technically our bereavement policy covers 3 days for immediate family, so I can approve Wednesday through Friday. The funeral is Saturday. I need Thursday and Friday to help coordinate. Right, but Wednesday through Friday is Thursday and Friday. It's 3 days. I need 4 days, Richard. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday for the service. And I have 19 days of PTO. The PTO isn't really the issue, Richard said, and this was the sentence Daniel would later realize that changed everything, not because of what it meant, but because of what it revealed. The PTO isn't really the issue, which meant your time is not yours. Your loss is subject to my schedule. Your father's death is an inconvenience I am tolerating up to a point. I can't approve more than 3 days right now. Richard continued, the Meredith presentation is too important. Come in Friday, knock it out of the park, and then you'll have the weekend for everything else. My father's funeral is Saturday, Richard. And you'll be there for it, that's what matters. There was a long silence. That's what matters, Daniel repeated. I know this is hard, but we're a team here and sometimes the team needs. I'll figure it out, Daniel said, thank you for calling. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table where he had sat the night before making decisions about casket linings. Priya came in, saw his face, and sat down across from him without saying anything. After a while she said, what did he say? Daniel told her. Priya was quiet for a moment. She was a woman who chose her words with great care, which meant that when she was furious she went very still first. She was very still now. You have 19 days of PTO, she said. He said that's not really the issue. Another silence. Okay, she said, what are you going to do? Daniel looked at his hands. He thought about his father calling every Sunday at 9 a.m. He thought about the flickering light above his cubicle, 6 weeks, 3 maintenance requests, nobody came. He thought about 19 days of PTO, saved up like a man hoarding emergency funds he was too afraid to ever spend. He thought about the word sorry appearing twice in an email he had written at 11 p.m. the night his father died. He thought about a man he had been slowly becoming over 9 years, a man with hunched shoulders and careful eyes, a man who had learned to want things less so the disappointment would hurt less, a man who apologized for existing in ways that required things from people who owed him those things freely. He thought, I don't want to be that man anymore. I'm going to take the 4 days, he said. Okay, said Priya. And then I'm going to take everything else back too. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not surprise exactly, more like recognition. Like she had been waiting a long time to see this person sit down at her kitchen table. Good, she said. He sent the email at noon. It was nothing like the one he'd sent the night before. There were no apologies, there were no carefully hedged phrases about hopping it isn't too much trouble, it was 4 sentences. Richard, I'm taking Wednesday through Saturday as bereavement leave. Per company policy, I'm also adding Monday as a PTO day to allow time to manage my father's estate. This is covered under my 19 accrued days. I'll be available by phone for urgent Meredith account questions through Thursday. He read it once, he didn't change anything, he hit send. Richard's response came 40 minutes later and was 6 paragraphs long. Daniel read the first 2, something about protocol and team expectations and flagging this with HR, and then stopped. He set his phone face down on the kitchen table and went to help Priya pick up Maya from school because his daughter was 7 years old and had just lost her grandfather and needed her father present. That was more important than whatever Richard Calloway had to say about protocol. Thursday afternoon, in the guest room of his Aunt Lily's house surrounded by his father's boxes, Daniel found a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was written on yellow legal pad paper in his father's handwriting, the handwriting of a history teacher, careful and deliberate and slightly formal. It was dated 8 months ago. Daniel, I've been thinking a lot lately about the things I didn't say when I had easier chances to say them. So I'm going to write this down now while I'm feeling clear, and you can decide what to do with it. You are, without question, the thing I am most proud of in my life. Not because of your job or your accomplishments, though those are real and I'm proud of them too, but because of the way you are with Priya and the way you are with Maya and the way you still call me back even when I called at a bad time. You are a good man, you were a good son. I want to tell you something your grandfather told me that I think I forgot for too long. Your time is the only thing you actually own. Everything else, money, things, even people, you're borrowing. But time is yours. The hours are yours. The days are yours. Don't let anyone make you feel that spending them on what matters is an imposition. Give Priya my love. Tell Maya her grandfather thought she was the best dancer he ever saw. Love, Dad. Daniel sat on the floor of the guest room for a long time. He went back to work on Tuesday. He dressed the same way he always dressed. He drove the same route. He parked in the same spot. He carried his coffee in the same travel mug, the one Maya had decorated with star stickers 2 summers ago. But something had shifted, something internal, architectural, and he knew it. And he suspected that everyone who saw him that morning knew it too, in the way people can feel these things before they can name them. He sat down at his cubicle. Above him, the fluorescent light flickered. He stood back up, walked to the facilities manager's office on the 2nd floor, a man named Dave who Daniel had never spoken to directly in 9 years, and said, "The light above my cubicle has been flickering for 6 weeks. I've submitted 3 maintenance requests. I need it fixed today." Dave blinked at him. "I'll send someone this afternoon." "Thank you," Daniel said and meant it and left. He went back to his desk. He opened his email. There were 43 messages waiting for him, including 3 from Richard and 1 from HR requesting a meeting to discuss his unauthorized extended leave. He opened Richard's emails first. He read them all the way through, this time calmly, the way you read something that has lost its power to frighten you. Richard was displeased. Richard felt that Daniel had shown poor judgment. Richard wanted to discuss moving forward and re-establishing expectations. Daniel drafted his response carefully. He thanked Richard for his patience. He noted that the leave had been taken in full compliance with company bereavement policy and had been supplemented by accrued PTO, both of which were his legal entitlements. He said he was glad to discuss the Meredith account. The presentation he had learned from a colleague had actually gone well in his absence, and looked forward to continuing his contributions to the team. No apologies, he read it once, he sent it. Then he opened the HR email and accepted the meeting. The HR meeting happened 2 days later. The HR representative was a woman named Sandra Park, who Daniel had always found to be fundamentally decent in a role that frequently required the opposite. She sat across from him with a folder open and an expression that was trying to be neutral and not quite getting there. Richard was not in the room. Daniel had wondered whether he would be. Sandra said the meeting was just a check-in. She said the company wanted to make sure Daniel understood the bereavement policy. She said there had been some concern about communication during his absence. Daniel listened, then he said, "Sandra, I'd like to make sure I understand the situation accurately. I lost my father. I took 3 days of bereavement leave, which is the company's stated policy for immediate family, plus 2 days of accrued paid time off, for which I have 19 days available. Is there any part of that was against policy?" Sandra looked at her folder. Technically, no. "And the 2 PTO days, was there any formal objection submitted before I took them?" Richard expressed concerns informally. "Was there a formal objection, a written denial?" A pause. "No." "So the leave was compliant." He kept his voice completely even. "I want to name something, Sandra, not as a complaint but as a clarity. I was asked to attend a client presentation on the day before my father's funeral. I'd like that to be part of whatever record this conversation creates." Sandra looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something that wasn't entirely professional neutrality. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to make trouble," Daniel said. I want to keep doing good work here. I have 19 years of PTO and I intend to use them in compliance with policy when my family needs me. That's not a threat, that's just who I am now. Sandra nodded slowly. I think that's reasonable, she said. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Nothing was formally resolved, which meant, in the language of corporate HR, that Daniel had won. In the weeks that followed, things changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that change happens when the ground has fundamentally shifted. He began leaving at 5:30 every day, not sneaking out, not rushing, just gathering his things at 5:30 and going home to his family the way a man who understands the value of his hours goes home. He began taking his lunch break. He walked around the block when the weather was good. Sometimes he called Priya. Once, he sat on a bench in the small park 2 streets from the office and did absolutely nothing for 45 minutes, and it was the most productive thing he did all day. He used 6 days of PTO to take Maya to see her grandparents on Priya's side, a trip they had been deferring for 3 years for reasons that now seemed incomprehensible to him. His daughter held a baby goat at a farm in Vermont. She talked about it for 3 weeks. He began speaking up in meetings. Not aggressively, he was not building a new identity out of aggression. But when he had something to say, he said it in the full and unhurried sentences it deserved, without preemptively apologizing for taking up air. He told Richard once, calmly and directly, that a decision Richard was making was going to cost them the Hartwell client, and he explained precisely why. Richard was annoyed. The Hartwell client left 2 months later for exactly the reasons Daniel had described. Richard did not apologize, but he began with some regularity, asking for Daniel's read on things before he made decisions. This was its own form of acknowledgement. The flickering light got fixed. It took one afternoon. Daniel stared at the steady, even glow above his desk and felt something almost like fury at how simple it had been. 7 months after his father's funeral, Daniel got a call from a competitor. A recruiter he'd spoken to briefly 2 years earlier, then filed away, then forgotten. They had a senior director position. The compensation was substantially better. The culture, the recruiter said, was one where people actually used their vacation time. He took the meeting. He came home and told Priya about it over dinner after Maya had gone to bed. She listened to the whole thing, then she said, "What do you want to do?" It was, he realized, a question he had stopped knowing how to answer somewhere in the middle of the last 9 years. What do you want? Not what is reasonable to want. Not what can you hope for if you're careful and small and grateful enough. What do you want? He thought about his father's letter. Your time is the only thing you actually own. I want to take it, he said. He resigned from Hargrove and Associates on a Thursday morning, giving the full 4 weeks of notice the employee handbook suggested, because Daniel Chen was not a man who burned things on his way out when walking out cleanly would do. Richard seemed genuinely surprised. This also surprised Daniel that after 9 years, Richard had somehow not understood that the relationship was conditional, that Daniel's loyalty had always been a response to circumstances rather than a permanent feature of his character. But then, men like Richard rarely do understand this about the people who work for them. The understanding would require too much acknowledgement of what they've asked those people to carry. On his last day, Sandra from HR stopped by his desk. I hope it goes well, she said, wherever you're going. Thank you, Sandra, he meant it. He packed his things. There was less than he'd expected. 9 years left only a drawer of belongings when the person had been careful not to settle in, and he carried the box out through the lobby and into the late afternoon November sunlight. He sat in his car for a moment. He thought about his father, who had called every Sunday at 9 a.m. because the call itself was the thing. He thought about Maya holding the baby goat. He thought about Priya saying good that morning at the kitchen table, the morning he had decided to stop being the man who apologized twice in an email he wrote on the night his father died. His phone showed 5:17 p.m. He drove home. He was there in time to help Maya with her homework. She was struggling with fractions which seemed important to her, and which he found he genuinely enjoyed helping with, the small, clean satisfactions of a problem that has a right answer. He made dinner while Priya changed out of her work clothes. They ate together, all 3 of them at the table, without anyone checking their phone. After Maya went to bed, Daniel sat on the back porch with a glass of wine and listened to the neighborhood sounds, a dog somewhere, a lawn mower in the distance, the particular quality of suburban quiet on a Thursday evening. He thought about the 9 years. He did not regret them entirely. He had learned things, built skills, built relationships that would outlast the job. But he thought about all the Sundays he had spent half distracted, answering work emails on his phone while his father's voice came through the speaker. All the dinners he'd been late to, all the small presences he'd withheld from his own life, saving himself up for something that turned out not to need him the way he'd feared. His father had known. That was the thing about the letter. His father had seen it years before Daniel had tried gently in his history teacher way to say, "Your time is yours. Stop giving it to people who will never understand what you're giving them." Daniel Chen finished his wine. He went inside. He locked the door. On Sunday morning at 9 a.m., his phone did not ring. He sat with that for a while, the specific silence of an absence where a presence used to be. Then he went downstairs, started the coffee, and when Maya patted down in her pajamas, still half asleep, and climbed into his lap without asking, he held her there in the morning quiet for as long as she wanted to stay. He was not going to be the kind of father whose children had to schedule time with him through an approval process. He was not going to be the kind of man who apologized twice for needing things that were already his. He was going to answer when the people he loved called, on Sundays and Tuesdays and 3 a.m.s and every ordinary Wednesday in between. He was going to be here. That was the thing he had taken back, not the vacation days, not the title, not the leverage in a room with an HR representative. Those were just evidence. What he had taken back was the understanding that his life was his own, that it had always been his own, and that the only real theft had been the years he'd spent believing in some quiet and unfought way that it wasn't. He poured Maya her orange juice. He started making breakfast. Outside, the morning was cold and clear and fully present, the way mornings are when you're finally there to receive them.